Hi there, I'm Heather Hall with PrincipledAcademy.com, where I disciple and mentor Christian homeschooling parents in a biblical classical form of education, which is oftentimes referred to as the principle approach. I also teach courses at BiblicalClassicalCommunity.com. We've been homeschooling from the beginning, and we have 4 adults now. We've been teaching them with a principle approach education. In this presentation, we're going to define the vocabulary of our topic, science and art. We're going to look at 2 things to consider when studying, see how science is enhanced by art and what the effect is of this team, talk about 2 key individuals, consider a final thought about artists, and appreciate biblical principles for each area of study. When we define words for our studies, we use Webster's 1828 dictionary because it's the only biblical worldview dictionary that we have. If you don't have a copy of it, I highly recommend one for your family library. Otherwise, you can use the app that's for free online. Just make note that not all of the words are entered into the online app. Now, Webster went to the original languages and scripture in order to correctly define words according to the way that God defines them. Now, when we look at science, we see that it's from Latin, and it means to know. In a general sense, knowledge or certain knowledge, the comprehension or understanding of truth or facts by the mind. The science of God must be perfect. In the second entry, it says in philosophy, a collection of the general principles or leading truths relating to any subject. So we can also look at it as in wisdom, there's a collection of general principles or leading truths. There are dichotomies that Webster breaks definitions down into, and pure science is broken down into self-evident truths, generally acknowledged truths, experiment and observation, general principles of an art. Another part of this definition is arts relate to practice as painting and sculpture. So something that's important to have our students make note of is that art is actually within the definition of science. So let's go ahead and define our keyword art. Arts are divided into useful or mechanic and liberal or polite. The liberal or polite arts are those in which the mind or imagination is chiefly concerned, as poetry, music, and painting. Now, the 2 things that we need to consider when we're studying are natural law, God's creation, and this is based on Romans 1:20, which I'm going to read to you. For since the creation of the world, his invisible attributes, his eternal power and divine nature have been clearly seen, being understood through what has been made, so that they are without excuse. And then we also need to consider revealed law, and that would be scripture. And we can see that in 2 Timothy 3:16, where scripture teaches us that all scripture is inspired by God and profitable for teaching, for reproof, for correction, for training in righteousness. Now, when we're talking about principles, we're talking about general truths, and we're talking about the cause, source, or origin of anything. As we study science and we include art, it's important that we help our children to see that God is the cause, the source of science and of art. Now, when we have science and we're studying it, and we couple that with art, and then we combine that with the principles, the biblical principles and reasoning, then what we end up doing is magnifying Creator God. And that is the end goal with our education of our children, is to magnify God in all things. He is the creator and author of all of the subjects. The key individual that I'd like to introduce you to is Antonie van Leeuwenhoek. He lived between 1632 and 1723. He was a natural philosopher and zoologist in Delft, and he was a Christian. Now, out of his book, Micrographia, he made some wonderful observations that I want to share with you. He said, "There are but few artificial things that are worth observing with a microscope, and therefore I shall speak but briefly concerning them. For the productions of art are such rude, misshapen things that when viewed with a microscope is little else observable but their deformity. The most curious carvings, appearing no better than those rude Russian images we find mentioned in Purchas, where 3 notches at the end of a stick stood for a face. And the most smooth and burnished surfaces appear most rough and unpolished." He continues with, "So that my first reason why I shall add but a few observations of them is their misshapen form, and the next is their uselessness. For why should we trouble ourselves in the examination of that form or shape, which is all we were able to reach with a microscope, which we know was designed for no higher a use than what we were able to view with our naked eye? Why should we endeavor to discover mysteries in that which has no such thing in it?" So, in essence, he's saying that anything that is created by mankind doesn't have any mystery to it. There's nothing to discover. He continues with, "Whereas in natural forms, so things that God has created, there are some so small and so curious, and their designed business so far removed beyond the reach of our sight, that the more we magnify the object, the more excellencies and mysteries do appear, and the more we discover the imperfections of our senses and the omnipotency, the power, and infinite perfections of the great Creator." With his microscope that he created, the lens was so powerful that he could see the invisible things to the naked eye. And one of those things within the microbial world are the Daphne, or Daphnia. So where art comes into the study of science is the observation of what God has created and designed. It helps to document the mysteries that are discovered under a microscope, for example. And then it helps to be able to help others to see those mysteries. Now, if you'll take note of this graph from this publication called A Treatise of Zoology by author E. Ray Lancaster, you can see that he has documented the mechanical function within the body of this Daphnia. And so he's declaring the wisdom of God through this illustration that he has drawn from his observation of Daphnia through the microscope. So artists and scientists make observations, but again, the artist is able to give a picture that helps people to clearly see those observations. Even though words could technically describe them, it's not necessarily the same as having somebody illustrate the wisdom. It also helps people to gain knowledge. There are very few people, at least back then, who were able to have a microscope. So they were able to gain knowledge from the visual representation that scientists and artists created. And this also gives people the ability to understand truths or facts by studying natural law, studying God's creation. And of course, they're learning from revealed law because Scripture teaches us about this regarding His creation, that we can learn from it. So artists magnify Creator God's name in all the earth by capturing details of His creation. They declare His wisdom, His mechanical wisdom that He applies to what He has created. Now here's another key individual, Carolus Linnaeus. He lived from 1707 to 1778. He was a botanist, a professor, and a Christian. So you can see from his illustration here that he paid careful attention to the general shape of the foliage that he saw within botany. He added texture to it with lines, And he also gave a general depiction of the height and structure of the plants so that others could see. So artists glorify God's name in all the earth by capturing the essence of his creation. They declare his wisdom, the practical wisdom of his design, that he has given something. Within that book, Linnaeus ended up talking about how plants reproduce, and he was able to draw illustrations to help others to understand that. He also did an illustration of this interesting item here, and there's a story to this where he went and visited a mayor, and the mayor was trying to convince him that this was an actual taxidermied creature that was found. However, after examining it and paying close attention, which he was able to do, Linnaeus was able to do because his eye was trained as an artist, and he was able to discern from what he studied in God's creation that this was not an actual creature. What it was a combination of feet and snakes that were combined from two different animals, obviously, because snakes don't have feet. And it was put together by monks as a representation of the creature in Revelation. So Linnaeus ended up going public with this, and that really upset the mayor because the mayor was hoping to sell this piece at a great price. So Linnaeus wasn't welcome anymore, and he had to flee. And anyhow, so artists declare truth about God's creation. And if we're responsible with the gifts and talents that God has given us, and with the skills that we develop as artists, then we will be declaring the truth about God's creation. Another example from Linnaeus' work is the general shapes of leaves that he observed, which shows God's principle of individuality among the plant life in his creation. So it's declaring the very basic first principle, and that is the principle of individuality, which also speaks to the individuality of Creator God. There is none like him. There is no other like him at all. And then when you see the renditions that different artists do, it also shows the principle of individuality, because every mark that a person lays down is going to be different. And when we're studying science and we're applying art to it, then that is something that we can help our children to observe. That everything in God's creation is unique. The marks that he has given it, so to speak, are distinct from any other piece that could be similar to it in any way. And when we're looking at something, we're not looking necessarily for how similar it is. Like, let's say with identical twins, we're actually looking for what is individual about the twins, or anything else in God's creation. We want to know what makes it special and unique. So artists reveal the beauty of God's creation. The elements of art are a part of that beauty. And this brings God honor as the master artist. Let's look at John J. Audubon as another key individual. We can see from his Birds of America, from Drawings Made in the United States book, that he is going to have a different depiction, a different representation or expression of how flowers look. And we can see that in contrast to how Linnaeus drew his illustrations in his botany books. So again, we see the individuality coming through. We also can see in Leonardo da Vinci's works that art enhances science in such a way that it can communicate better or differently than words can. Imagine reading through Da Vinci's journal, never having seen anything that he was describing, and trying to comprehend it. So his illustrations about muscles and nerves and veins were very important to convey the message of the complexity of God's design within human beings. Now, here's a question that I would love to leave you with. This is a reasoning question. Why is it important to understand that art is within the definition of science? That's something for you to ponder and contemplate about and discuss with your children. Here are 5 action steps for you. Allow your students to draw or paint at their current skill level. Remember, some of the sketches in the journals of the scientists were very simple line drawings. Keep it simple. A large variety of art supplies isn't necessary. Encourage your students to include art as a part of their research and journaling. Incorporate biblical reasoning questions as a part of your studies. Go through the notebook pages that are provided for you as a handout.